Good evening, everyone. My name is Samil Doyle, and for this literature review, I decided to focus on the Black experience in 21st century higher education. So, the problem being focused on is cultural and racial insensitivity and misunderstanding pertaining to Black students who attend PWIs, also known as predominantly white institutions. The question being asked is, what does the Black experience look like on a predominantly white campus in 21st century America? And my literature review had a historical perspective, which focused on significant events in African American history pertaining to education, identity through stereotypes, microaggressions, self esteem, and self efficacy, as well as the idea of achieving Black excellence on a predominantly white playing field. So, when President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, there were a plethora of white missionaries who decided to go down south in an attempt to build schools and educate the now recent ex-slaves. However, when they got there, they realized that there were schools already being built. Slaves had already, or ex-slaves, I should say, had already begun the process of educating themselves. One thing that is known from the study of the slave era was the fact that many slaves educated themselves in secret. So when slavery was abolished, it's no surprise that African Americans, those who were enslaved, began the process immediately of educating themselves. So this misconceived notion that Black people are incapable of, educating themselves or lack ambition played a huge role in the historical outlook as it pertained to education. Also, HBCUs and IBIs have been in existence in the United States for over 200 years. So that in itself shows that the idea that African Americans don't value education is very much untrue. Despite the fact that the American education system was created for white people by white people and is still very much geared towards white people, is one of the main reasons that historically Black colleges and universities and independent Black institutions were created, aside from the segregation laws. But it was a sense of, how can Black people excel at something that wasn't created for them? So we'll create the same type of thing, but for ourselves, so that we as Black people can succeed. The 1996 presidential election was one of the most significant in history as it pertained to African Americans and their education, mainly because it looked at whether or not affirmative action would still exist, if federal student loans, which paid for a lot of the African American college educations, whether or not those loan programs would continue to grow or if they would be cut off, and whether or not the civil rights movement would have a positive impact on African American higher education. Basically, the Black community had a very large stake in who would be elected president, and whether or not it would have been, whether or not the Reverend Jesse Jackson was going to run for president, or if if the president was white, as President Bill Clinton won, how would he view African American issues? Would he care? Would he try to improve the things that African Americans cared about? So the 1996 presidential election was huge because Reverend Jesse Jackson did have, the opportunity or the interest to run in the presidential election. Whether or not he made it that far was a different story, but just the fact of the matter that he had interest really gave African Americans hope, because they would have somebody representing them, what they stood for, and what they cared about. As it pertains to identity, identity formulation, stereotypes and microaggressions are two things that impact identity hugely. So a stereotype is defined, generally it's very negative, and it's something that is associated with a particular group. And a microaggression is understood as a subtle, sometimes unintended insult that pertains to a group in particular. So as we know, stereotypes for African Americans, they have big lips, they're loud, they like watermelon, Aunt Jemima, things like that. A microaggression would be something as simple, oh, I just cornrowed my hair, and you feel as though it's okay to just walk up and touch my hair because maybe culturally it's different. So you're touching my hair without asking my permission because you just assume that it's okay to touch my hair. A microaggression would be if my hair is really curly naturally and one day I come in with it straight and you're like, oh, how did you get your hair like that? Did you put chemicals in it? That's a microaggression. Sometimes it's very unintentional, but microaggressions are something that aren't as well understood as stereotypes, especially on the college campuses. Self-esteem and self-efficacy also go hand in hand, especially because stereotypes and microaggressions affect self-esteem and self-efficacy. So self-esteem is, self-acceptance, respect, and basically a positive evaluation of yourself. That's if you have a high self-esteem. Some people have low self-esteems and therefore they don't respect themselves or they don't have a positive evaluation, and of course they don't have self-acceptance. Self-efficacy is your belief in your ability to do something. So if stereotypes and microaggressions and basically history have told you that you aren't good enough to do something, your self-esteem and your self-efficacy are going to be affected, because if you're told something, oh, as a black person, you're the minority, so you aren't good enough to be in the same playing field as the white majority. For years you were told that, you're eventually going to start believing it. So your self-efficacy, your belief in your ability, is going to go down, which means your self-esteem is going to go down. Student-built support systems. Basically, the research shows that on predominantly white campuses, the black students, the African American students, they tend to flock together. And this can just be seen as, they're building a social network in which they're comfortable with. They know automatically that, cultural interests are going to be the same. And the problem is with PWIs, predominantly white institutions, a lot of the programs created to build community by the administrators are geared towards white middle class America. And that's something that really needs to be focused on, especially as the field of higher education diversifies itself more and more. And it shouldn't be seen as a negative thing when African American students kind of come together to create that support system, because it shows that they are taking the initiative to ensure that they have the necessary support. But something should be put in place so that white students or international students feel as though they can be a part of the support system as well. Another thing that makes it difficult to reach Black excellence on a predominantly white playing field is the lack of African American faculty representation. It's one of those things where this lack of African American faculty on PWI campuses, it's a focal point for African American student success. Educators stress the importance of affirmative action because it ensures a sense of diversity on campuses, racially, ethnically, amongst faculty, staff, and students. And the research shows that providing a diverse teaching staff creates a better educational environment for students as well as educational opportunities. And African American students have stated that their African American professors push them in a different way, a way that is more progressive, and a way that doesn't add stress, because they feel like they are standing for something, and they can make it, even though they've been told for years that because they're African American they have to move a certain way. Seeing their African American professors succeed, it's a sense of, it's reassuring to them. It lets them know that they can succeed and they will succeed. Finally, it's necessary for colleges and universities, but specifically predominantly white ones, to understand the need for support as it pertains to African American students and how to go about creating the support in a way that won't come off as a microaggression or won't feed into stereotypes and won't negatively impact self-efficacy or self-esteem. And it's also important to understand that 20%, there's a 20% higher graduation rate amongst white college students than Black students at predominantly white institutions. And this is something that lets us know that success plans need to be put together by college success coordinators and administrators and academic advisors and faculty and students, so that everybody is on the same page and everybody is held accountable to their responsibility of educating all students who enroll, regardless of their race, ethnicity, gender, and socioeconomic background. So although 21st century America feels as though we are progressing and we've moved away from slavery, it still needs to be understood that racism is still very real and it is happening, whether it be intentional or unintentional, especially for African American students who are attending predominantly white institutions. Again, my name is Samuel Taylor, and that concludes my study of the Black experience in 21st century higher education. Thank you.